Good morning, everyone. Let's take a look at some updates as it relates to the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. I'm recording this at 9:30 a.m. Central on Thursday, October 26th, 2023. Over the last 24 hours, Israel says that they have struck an additional 250 targets. That is not just in Gaza. They are also striking Hezbollah targets to the north in Lebanon. And on that note, since this fighting has intensified on October 7th, Hezbollah says that they've announced the deaths of 44 of their militants due to the ongoing fighting with Israel. The Gaza Ministry of Health put out additional statistics around Palestinians killed inside of Gaza. Of course, worth noting that any information coming from the Gaza Ministry of Health is at the very least vetted through Hamas before it's released to the public. They say that since the Israeli campaign kicked off just over 2 weeks ago, 6,546 Palestinians have been killed, 17,439 wounded. Both of those numbers have jumped up pretty substantially in the last couple days. Now, we got information that the IDF kicked off a small ground raid into Gaza yesterday. They said that IDF tanks and infantry struck numerous terrorist cells, infrastructure, and anti-tank missile launch posts. The soldiers have since exited the area and returned to Israeli territory. Now, looking at the video, it looks like a handful of tanks, armored vehicles, bulldozers, on or about 10 vehicles, kind of what you can see from this clip. Doesn't mean there weren't more. This is just what we have access to at this point. Now, there's a couple reasons Israel might do something like this, kind of a quick raid in and out of Gaza. One is to test Hamas's defenses. Again, we're waiting for this large-scale offensive to kick off. It's not crazy that the IDF would want to go in and see what they might face as soon as they cross that border. They also could be attempting to clear certain areas, make sure there's no mines or IEDs in some of the paths that they might use when the main effort eventually kicks off. Now, since October 7th, I know there's been a bunch of different names of organizations thrown out there, and it's just kind of assumed that people know who these are, and I know that's not always the case. So I thought it was worth stepping back, providing a little context for all of the organizations that are either already engaged in the fighting or could get involved going forward. Now, the common thread across the board here is all the organizations I'm going to walk through are Iranian-backed militias. They're not all Shiite. The first two are Sunni, the rest are Shiite, but they are, funded, trained, and equipped to varying degrees by Iran. They all dislike the United States, and they all hate Israel. So, loose allies, if you will. Starting in Israel, we have Hamas, also known as the Islamic Resistance Movement, and then the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Hamas is kind of the main player here. They are the governing authority in Gaza. They're the ones being held responsible in large part for the October 7th attacks. There were Palestinian Islamic Jihad fighters that took part in that. The main difference between those two in Gaza, and they do have a small contingent in the West Bank, but the majority is in Gaza. The main difference there is Hamas has a governance structure to it, right? They have tried to govern Gaza. Palestinian Islamic Jihad it's just fighters. It's just that their actions historically have been much less considerate of Palestinian civilians, right? They're there to fight. They're there to destroy Israel. Shifting north to Lebanon, we have Hezbollah, also known as the Party of God. This has widely been considered, Hezbollah, as the largest or the most well-equipped non-state actor in the world. So Hezbollah is not the official party or the government of Lebanon. They just happen to have control over really the southern half of Lebanon. Now, that stat of being the most well-armed non-state actor, that's been thrown around since like 2006, 2007 timeframe. It might be different now. You got the Houthis, another Iranian-backed group in Yemen. They've got pretty substantial firepower, pretty significant strength. But either way, Hezbollah is a force to be reckoned with in the Middle East. Shifting over to Iraq, we've got Kataib Hezbollah, the Party of God's Brigades, Asaib al-Haq, the League of the Righteous, the Badr Organization, previously known as the Badr Brigades, and Hakarat Hezbollah al-Nujaba, the movement of the Party of God's Nobles. Now, those first three were formed during or before the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, and they fought and they killed American soldiers. So those first three organizations there, Iranian-backed Shiite militias, were engaged in combat operations with U.S. and coalition forces in Iraq. Eventually, they shifted over, and the reason this last group here, Hakarat Hezbollah al-Nujaba, that they were created was more in response to the Islamic State threat. So they all kind of banded together and, to a degree, fought with the U.S. and Iraq against Islamic State. But those first three very much have American blood on their hands. Shifting over to Syria, we've got the Zanabiyun Division, which is widely considered the Pakistani Hezbollah. That is a Shiite militia fighting alongside Syrian regime forces. And then the Fatimiyun Division, which is an Afghan Shia militia, also fighting in Syria alongside Assad regime forces. It's a lot. It's messy. I got it. If you can only remember a few here, I would say Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Of course, these are the groups that Israel's fighting right now and are going to be the focus in the near term. Hezbollah to the north in Lebanon, just because if this thing escalates, that's likely the first point with a direct confrontation between Hezbollah and Israel. And then in Iraq, I keep an eye on Kataib Hezbollah. Just, outside of the Houthis in Yemen, Kataib Hezbollah has the most capabilities and the highest likelihood of really being able to conduct significant attacks, not necessarily against Israel, but against U.S. or allied interests in the region. Now, the IDF continues to request that civilians evacuate from Gaza. It's not leaving Gaza entirely, but it's moving from the north to the south, where more humanitarian aid is set to flow in. The water's been turned on, things like that. The idea here is to clear the path in the north and in around Gaza City for the eventual ground invasion carried out by the Israeli forces. With more civilians leaving the area, they can go in recognizing that at least the vast majority of people remaining are legitimate military targets, or that's the hope. Now, the IDF released an audio recording with some of the challenges that the civilians are facing in trying to flee Gaza. I'll play it here.
محمد
الو
كيفك؟
ايوه
بحكي معك ضابط عن الاندفاع الاسرائيلي. انا عشان املك سلامتك بدي تنزل ضروري لاتجاه خان يونس.
لوين؟
لاتجاه خان يونس ضروري. انا بديش تخاطر حالك، فمن هيك بدي تنزل لاتجاه الجنوب لاتجاه خان يونس.
نسكر كل الطرق. طيب
يا عمي محل ما انت موجود فيه سكر. انت لازم وين سكر؟ مين سكر الطريق؟ حماس؟
صحيح.
ايش؟
ايوه صحيح.
وين سكروا الطريق؟
عن شارع صلاح الدين.
صلاح الدين؟
ايوه.
كيف هم سكروا الطريق؟
بوجهوا الناس، مش حد يطلع، ما عاد الناس بيطلعوا بوجهوهم.
اما شو يعني حطوا سيارات؟ شو سووا؟
ايوه.
كيف بالضبط؟ فهمني. تفضل انت شو بدك
كيف؟ انت السيارات اللي بيطلعوا بوجهوهم وين بيرجعوا.
اما كيف هم سكروا الطريق؟ فهمني.
يعني كيف بتلاقي ناس
هم يطلقوا نار على الناس اللي بدهم ينزلوا؟
ايوه.
So nothing really shocking or new here. We've heard this before. Hamas trying to stop civilians from leaving the area. Look, it's in their best interest to have a confusing battlefield for Israel when they go in there. Just is. That's how these insurgent groups, that's how these terrorist networks are able to survive. If the entire area was 100% removed of all civilians, it would be significantly easier for Israel to go in and actually eradicate Hamas. Additionally, yesterday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave a speech outlining the current state of the war and what to expect going forward. He said, quote, "We are in the midst of a campaign for our existence. We have set two goals for this war: to eliminate Hamas by destroying its military and governing abilities, and to do everything possible to bring our captives home. All Hamas terrorists are dead men walking, above ground, below ground, outside of Gaza. We are raining down hellfire on Hamas. We've already eliminated thousands of terrorists, and this is only the beginning. At the same time, we are preparing for a ground incursion. I will not detail when, how, or how many, or the overall considerations that we are taking into account." So a couple things that stood out to me here. One, recognizing one of the major goals is bringing all the captives home. Kind of been under the radar. There's been a lot of ongoing negotiations, but not a lot of movement when it comes to hostages. And the second part here is saying that all of Hamas terrorists are dead men walking above ground, below ground, got it, all the ones in Gaza, and those outside of Gaza. Remember that the leader of Hamas is in Qatar, right? They have organizations, they have leadership outside of Gaza itself. And if they truly want to eliminate the organization that is Hamas, you can't just go after the people in Gaza. It's going to have to be a wider spread campaign. Haven't really seen that play out yet, but seems like it's in the cards. Now, Netanyahu also talked about accountability, talking about the failures on October 7th, saying that they are going to look into that. He will be looked into, but saying now is not the time. Right now is the time to focus on the fight. He said, "As Prime Minister, I am responsible for ensuring the future of our country. And at present, it is my responsibility to lead the state of Israel and the people to a crushing victory over our enemies. Now is the time to unite for one goal, to storm forward to victory." Now, from what I've seen in a lot of Israeli media, it does seem like the Israeli people are incredibly united right now. They're united behind the flag, united behind the idea of defeating a common enemy, not necessarily united behind individual political figures. So I understand Netanyahu's comment here of, we are going to seek accountability, just not right now. Right now, we got to win the war. I mean, if you think back in American history, we've had a couple major intelligence failures, right? 9/11 being one, Pearl Harbor being another. And in both of those, it was absolutely critical that we dug in to figure out what went wrong to prevent that from happening in the future. But you can't let that hamper your ability to strike back quickly and effectively, to actually destroy the organization that did that damage in the first place. Now, yesterday, there were 2 failed Security Council resolutions at the United Nations focused on the war between Israel and Hamas. It started with a U.S. resolution that was put forward. That was voted down by China and Russia. And then following that, Russia put forward a resolution that was denied with no votes by the United Kingdom and the United States. Now, according to the United Nations, the 2 resolutions were largely similar, but with a few key differences. They said the U.S. focus was on Israel's inherent right to self-defense. It sounds like the U.S. Even went a little bit further than that and kind of walked it back by the time they actually put the resolution up for a vote. And then the Russian version called for an immediate ceasefire to allow humanitarian aid to flow into Gaza. That immediate ceasefire is also something that China seems to be supporting. I haven't seen that they've called for that outright, but in comments after this vote, they say that is one of their priorities, is stopping the fighting to allow humanitarian aid to flow in. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if interested in national security subjects, be sure to check out the sit reps I put out on Substack. The link is in the description below. 7 to 10 of the top stories each week, along with a few podcast recommendations. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.